Hi, this is Bob Fiedler. This is a re-recording of a presentation that I gave at the 2022 Master Gardener Business Meeting on November 8th. I'm going to turn off my video so that you can see the full extent of the slides. Okay, about the Hartley Trial Gardens. This is an area located within the U of I Arboretum that's located east-southeast of the Idea Garden. That the Master Gardeners take care of. So it's a short walk from that area. There's a parking lot a little south on Lincoln Avenue of the Idea Garden where you can park and walk out directly on a sidewalk to the Hartley Gardens. And then the area of the project that I'm discussing is the one circled in red in the image here. So the original purpose of that whole area labeled number 4 is to evaluate evaluate new plant selections and cultivars. But its current use has become mostly turf grass. There's some annuals planted in the area every year, and there are some native plantings of perennials by master naturalists. But we formed a new partnership in 2020 between the extension and the Arboretum to establish native plant gardens in this project area. The goals of the project are to create and maintain native plant, sun, part sun, and shade gardens. Now you can see in the figure on the top, this is the area that we had. This is the state of it as of 2020. It was all just grass with virtually nothing under the honey locust trees you can see in the background. There's some benches there, but it's not as inviting as it could be if it had nice garden plants to look at and admire. Additional goals of the project are to evaluate the performance of the plants that we would install and also the cultural practices that we use in putting them there. We want to develop a design for both aesthetics and sustainability, including the ecological benefits. Just low input was important because we have limited financial resources, volunteer time, and volunteer effort. We didn't want to use a lot of pesticides. We wouldn't want to do much watering. All of that is along stated sustainability lines of thinking, and then should be a high value to pollinators and other wildlife, which would include birds that depend on, for example, insects during the summer months to raise their young. Finally, we hope to inspire the public to use these native plants in their own home landscapes, which they might do after they observe our gardens. There's a specific educational mission as well for the master naturalists and master gardeners who participate installing these gardens. They would learn about site preparation, identifying both the weeds and the native plants, how we pick them out for a garden, how to grow them, what their requirements are. They would learn about the garden designs that we use and why these are low maintenance. And they would learn how to manage these gardens going forward. The public that visits the garden can observe the native plants in all their seasons. So when they are in flower, when they're not in flower, they'd see what the aesthetics of gardens like this are like, so they can decide for themselves whether they want to, how many of these they want to use and just how they might use these plants. They can also see the pollinators and other wildlife that come and use these plants and how they're used. Do they eat the leaves? Do they come to the flowers? Do they eat the seeds, etc.? So we drew up an early garden plan. With the resources we had, we could focus on the pentadiagonal section here in the upper left. The idea was to have some border gardens around the perimeter, and then a kind of an internal border of grassy plants, and then put taller filler prairie plants in the middle. The other two sections were less carefully planned, but since we had under the honey locust tree in the bottom section, we have 3 honey locust trees. There was some leaf litter, some pretty much bare ground, some weeds there, but we could leave it like that and say to see if we could attract native bees to nest there. So the border garden layouts, we drew up specific plans. One of them is directly representative of the Red Oak Rain Gardens brochure for a sunny and dryish site. So that has 11 or 12 species listed here in the diagram. Then we came up with additional pollinator gardens for the other areas in the garden, which would have somewhat different conditions. And the goal is to not duplicate too many plants. And so most of the plants in the other border gardens are different from the ones in the Red Oak Rain Garden brochure, and that will actually bring the total of plants to about 80 species. So this is just four of the, you've seen four of the different border gardens that I developed for the pentagonal section here. And we were over 2 growing seasons able to establish all of these plants and put the filler plants inside and the internal border grassy plants. And of course, this purpose of the talk is to say more details about how that went. So activities in 2021, the first year, we created these plans for the pentadiagonal section. We want to have flowers for all seasons so that the pollinators can be fed for the whole time. Want to provide host plants for butterflies and moths and other insects that come to the plants because they have needs in addition to just nectar. Their caterpillars have to eat something. The locations of all the plants are chosen based on the available light, sunlight exposure, and water available. The shady areas tend to be more moist. So we do that so that the plants will thrive in their site without much care. We want to put the shorter plants in the outermost areas of the section so that the taller plants will be visible behind them. Now, before we went did anything, we collected some soil for testing and sent it in for analysis to a lab. And got back the results that said that we had sufficient organic matter and sufficient nutrients. We didn't have to amend the soil at all. We herbicided the site to get rid of the existing grass. I'll say more about how why we chose to do herbicide and not other methods in the next slide. And then on and had the Arboretum staff till the plot. On planting day, we installed a bunch of plugs. We sowed some seeds of additional species. We put in a fence to prevent rabbits from eating the plants right away. A little bit of mulch was available. Did some watering for the plants after we installed them. And this was the labor of about 10 master gardeners and 3 master naturalists. By that planting time, we had obtained about half of the desired species. There were limitations on what we could pay and what species were available at the time that we were ready to plant. There are certainly alternatives to using herbicide. We did conclude after looking at all these alternatives that at the scale, the size of this garden is about 1,600 square feet. So it's about the size of someone's entire front yard. That herbicide would be most practical, and we thought that it would also impact the soil structure and frankly the environment in a way that wasn't much more damaging than the methods listed here. Now, other things we could do is shade and bake the soil under black plastic. So we'd have to purchase this plastic sheeting and then dispose of it after we were done or use it again for other projects like this, which we didn't really plan on. Note that it kills both the growing plants and seeds underneath, but that also kills not only disease organisms in the soil, but beneficial organisms, and they're actually very important for, can be very important for root growth, for example. This method takes weeks of warm sunny days to get hot enough. So that would be less practical because we just have one planting day and we have a large area. We could smother it with cardboard and then put compost on it. This is a method for preparing vegetable gardens advocated by author Charles Dowding. But in this case, with 1,600 square feet, that would require at least 20 cubic yards of compost. A cubic yard is about the size of a washing machine, so that's the area, the volume of several cars. It'd be a lot of labor to place this, and a lot of expense, and driving trucks in. With this method, you can plant immediately into the compost, but note that you're creating possibly an undesirable soil transition if there isn't much organic matter under that cardboard. The plant roots may stay as a result in just the top layer where the soil is different. And so that was another disadvantage of this method. Another method advocated is repeated tilling of the soil. This would take an entire season to keep killing off any weeds that sprout. That's very labor and fuel intensive. It also demolishes the soil structure, so it would take a while for the soil to recover and have the worms and the ants work on it, and the microorganisms that help the roots grow need to reestablish. So that would slow things down. That wasn't going to work for us. And then a method that I often use in my backyard is just to scrape off the grass and weeds along with some topsoil with a shovel or sod cutter. The soil underneath is typically pretty devoid of organic matter in people's backyards, so you would need to amend that. I personally have found that it takes robust plants to thrive in that, and it's difficult to get rid of all the grass and weeds. So we wouldn't want to do that on a large scale like this. Plus, we'd have to dispose of all that sod. Okay, moving to more activities done in 2021. We used a kind of a tall sprinkler that's barely visible in the middle of this photograph. It gets up over the tall plants, so it can reach the center of the garden. The 38 potted species plants that we installed thrived, which is encouraging. The 12 of the directly sown species grew well. Many of them flowered their first year despite growing from seed there on site. Some species that we planted from seed did not grow. We battled a weed infestation because we had tilled the soil. We had a lot of bare soil. We only had about half the plants we planned on for the final garden plan. We didn't really have a lot of mulch covering the soil, and it's also challenging to distinguish the young native plants from the weeds. So more on that. There were at least 50 species of weeds seen in the pentagonal section itself. A few of those are native, but many weren't. Some of the wildflowers that we're planting look like weed species in some stage of growth there. Many plants can have leaves that look different on different areas of the same plant and in different stages of growth. So for example, you can see the giant ragweed leaves here, and there are other plants that look like it, such as wild golden glow, and at a certain stage of growth, brown-eyed Susans look very much like ragweed. In fact, I made the mistake of pulling out a brown-eyed Susan thinking it was a giant ragweed. When I gave the talk at the business meeting, one of the participants noted that she tried one of the plant ID applications on a plant in her yard, and it was saying it was giant ragweed, but she left it there, and it turned out to be brown-eyed Susan. So even the plant apps aren't necessarily correct either, because they're working with the same information that we are when we look at the plants. I noticed in the development of the native plants, though, that some of the low-growing native weeds can have a synergistic effect. They shade the soil, so they act like mulch. They can keep some of the other weeds that would be taller from growing underneath them. But the ones that we planted already have a head start, so they seem to thrive near these weeds. So example would be this prostate spurge that you probably recognize from gravelly areas in your driveways and yards. So I just noticed when I would pull those out that the soil would be moist underneath. So I was thinking, maybe I'll just leave those there. It's kind of that, and the yellow oxalis, which is another common weed. Those two were short in stature and seemed to protect the soil. And there were a lot of them, so I focused my weeding on weeds that would be more likely to be a problem. So some notes on removing weeds. Certainly helps to pull when the soil is moist, because your goal is to get the root crown, not just the top of the plant. Nearly always a trowel is helpful for doing that. We get down into the soil and take those roots out, so the plant really is eliminated. Then there's triage strategies. While we note that many species are much easier to remove while small, you'll have to identify those weeds, make sure you know that they're not a native plant that you want to grow. Now, if you can't do that in any way, in any event, try to get those plants before the seeds ripen. Because if they start producing seed, then you'll have more of the same weeds later. You also want to get them before they shade any desirable plants growing there. If you have plants growing in the shade there, growth will be inhibited. So if it's a native plant, that's a bad thing. So I try to also prioritize the non-native weeds compared to the native ones. So for example, tree of heaven, I would want to really remove as soon as I saw that. On the other hand, if I'm busy, I might leave perhaps a fleabane, because it is a native plant. It kind of looks like a white aster. So if I get to it later, that's okay. It is very prolific, but if I get it before it goes to seed, I'm okay. I find it handy to have resources at my fingertips when I'm out at the garden. So the Illinois Wildflowers.info website is terrific, but it's a little cumbersome to use on a phone. I carry around a book that's about common backyard weeds, Kindle version of it, so I can thumb through there and identify some of the species I don't recognize and how to get rid of them. Found that was very useful. So moving on to 2022, this past year, cut the plant stems of the plants already in the pentadiagonal section to heights between 8 and 24 inches to allow for native bees to nest in them. The bees may have tunneled into the hollow stems or eaten through the pith in the fall to put seeds there and or put their eggs there for the developing grubs that will overwinter in those stems. So I don't want to kill them off. This is information coming from both the Xerces Society website and Heather Holmes' books on pollinators. We also ordered seeds from 30 additional native species to increase the diversity of plants. And we did a great job in the greenhouse. We grew nearly 1,500 plugs. That was a lot more than expected. So I was able to use 800 plants in the Hartley garden, and the rest went to the UI Extension demonstration prairie there on along I-72 and Country Fir Road. I had to revise the plans for the 3 garden areas to accommodate the species that we did grow and the numbers that we did have. So we did okay in the pentadiagonal section. The other ones were very quickly done and more of a drift kind of planting style, and as a sampler like we did on the pentadiagonal section. This octagonal section that's in the foreground in the top image here was herbicided and fenced and then planted with lots of these plugs. In the honey locust section, we used some plugs. We didn't prepare the soil at all. It was sparsely weedy, so I just hand weeded those out. And I had a planting day where we planted some of the plugs. We found there were many volunteers that showed up there, so we got the benefit of last year's growth and seed production. We found when planting that octagonal section that the soil was compacted because we didn't till it, and we left the sod, so that was difficult to get a shovel into the ground. Luckily, we had a drill and an auger bit handy, so they made the planting holes with that. More activities in 2022. as I mentioned, we had a lot of native plants. Any bare ground left in the pentagonal section saw sprouting of many asters, goldenrods, American bellflower. Under the honey locust, we got some yellow coneflowers blowing in from master naturalist planting nearby. Found that most of the plugs that we put in the octagonal section thrived, just like they had in the previous year in the pentagonal section that we had tilled. So the fact that we didn't till it didn't seem to inhibit growth too much. We got many of them flowering in the first year. We got many less weeds, and the dead grass served as a little bit of a mulch there to help keep the soil moist. The native plants did help to in the second year now in the pentagonal section to shade out the lower growing weeds. So we really didn't have to remove the oxalis or the prostrate spurge. There was double-edged sword there. Some of the less vigorous growing native plants were shaded out by some of the more vigorous growing native plants. The honey locust sections pictured in the lower figure here. The weeds were removed. We watered only around the edge where we had put the plugs. Many of the volunteer plants just grew, and they were given no care at all, and they still flowered in their first year. So you can see there's some New England asters there that grew as volunteers, and they just flowered the first year. And in fact, they grew short in stature, but it still makes a nice plant to have. So the cultural practices, it's kind of a recap, but there are some other points to make here. So it's important to site the plants so that they'll flourish with minimal care. That means getting the right moisture levels and light exposure. For watering, we noted the sprinkler is slow to deliver significant water. So at the same time that the sprinkler was kind of watering the center of the pentagonal section, we went around the border with hoses and hit those plants where the water wasn't reaching very well. The fresh transplants needed a lot of water in the first few months before they're, especially as we moved into the drier months of the summer. As their root systems developed, however, they needed less watering from us. The rains were rather timely last summer, and plants pretty much did okay on their own in the pentagonal section because they were established already. The volunteer native plants seem to grow well enough without much supplemental watering. Even in areas under the honey locusts, the shade from the trees did help the soil stay somewhat moist. And so those plants were able to thrive there. After all, they are native plants, and that's how they would grow in the wild. Now, to help the native pollinators, it was a good practice to leave at least somewhat mulch-free soil for the ground nesting bees. They need more or less bare soil for places to build their nests. So if it was 4 inches thick, they would never use that. We did wait until spring to cut any stems because we wanted to leave those above ground so that the stem nesting bees would use them. And we left both some leaf litter and cut stems, the stems we did cut later, because they may harbor overwintering pollinators. So some of the butterflies and moths that use the honey locust leaves will fall down to the ground with the leaves and pupate there over winter as pupa. So they'll hatch in the spring, and we don't want to be raking them up and removing them from the site. So plans for 2023, we're trying frost seeding for some additional species. Frost seeding is when you directly sow species of plants in late winter. Could be done, is best done before an expected snowfall, and the snow helps to cover the plants so the birds and rodents don't find the seeds. And it helps the seeds make better contact with the soil. So we don't really have to scrape the soil or very much or walk on it to be sure that the seeds make good soil contact. We just let the snow do that. And we also get for free the action of cold stratification, so that by natural processes, the seeds are ready to grow in the spring. Now, maintenance is something to focus on next year. We have to control the number and location of the more aggressive or more vigorous regrowing native plants, because they will shade out some of the species, and we don't want to lose the species that we do have. We want them for display, we want them to be visible, and we want them to attract whatever pollinators that they would attract. So we didn't want to have it be all asters or anything. So even though the picture here shows many asters, there's really supposed to be a planned pollinator garden under that space. So we're going to make sure that those plants are removed, and to let the plants that we did have grow. One thing we might do for some of the nesting bees, there are small bees that will use the little holes that you often see in decaying wood that's lying on the ground in a wooded area, or notice that at Lake of the Woods, for example, they use very aesthetic looking logs. It looks like driftwood. This could be utilized by some of the native bees. So it's both a decoration and habitat. We don't have any significant amount of signage. If you think about how to do this signage, there's many species here. They spend some time not in flower. So if we just put signs there, it might be unclear which plant the sign refers to. So it's almost, we're thinking about different ways how we might identify the plants, maybe have photographs of the plants and then some information about their growing conditions and what pollinators they attract, and then let the public see those pictures there and see if they can identify the plants that are in the garden that way. So it's can be an educational opportunity of that sort. We would like to have a website, but there are certain bureaucratic reasons that we can't directly add content to the U of I's existing web pages. So that's not an easy option for us. We're still trying to pursue how we might do this. And of course, we could do various presentations and articles in the various newsletters. Okay, so this is one of my favorite photographs and of the Hartley garden that I took last fall. And I left that in the first question I got when I gave this presentation the first time was, what species of asters are visible in that photograph? Well, we have the bright pink and purple ones to the right are New England asters. Then the lavender ones in the foreground are Short's aster, and then the light colored ones, it's just a very light purple, that's smooth blue aster. Question was raised about the allelopathy of asters and goldenrods. That's been mentioned in the scientific literature, that these plants could have property of preventing the growth of anything growing near them, the way that black walnut trees do, and some grasses like tall fescue. Well, I was able to research that in the meantime and see that, observationally, in the wild, you see asters and goldenrods growing in the same places that some of the spring ephemerals grow. So they're not having in a native woodland, they don't have any deleterial effect on that, to make up a new word. And so I just hadn't seen that happening. And there's literature that confirms that, where they've done actual experiments to see in field plots, does that actually happen? And they were finding that wasn't a problem, even though plants themselves could cause that and could inhibit growth of other plants in the laboratory. So another question was, how do we cut those stems to heights between 8 and 24 inches in the spring? What do we use? And it's suggested in the books to use something like loppers or pruning shears, but I find that a head shears is just the thing to do a quick job on that. I could imagine that a weed whacker, especially if you can equip it with the plastic blades instead of just the string, could potentially do that. I haven't seen them cut very large plants, but I think the smaller plants would go down pretty quickly, and so that would be even quicker than head shears, but I do like the head shears. The question is often raised about whether fire could be used to maintain these gardens. And I would say, well, it's an urban setting and we have a wooden pergola that's off the two of the borders of the Tagnal section, which is made of wood, that could catch fire. And so it's doubtful that we would be allowed to do this. The section's large enough, we might even need a burn plan and get the fire department involved and all that. And I don't think that's very practical, and I don't think it's actually necessary to maintain this. We can just go on the site, remove the weeds by hand that we don't want growing there, and we have a lot more sort of more detailed management in a garden like this. This isn't a prairie restoration, it's more of a showcase of the plants. And so we're controlling to a larger extent what goes where. So we'll have to pull out some of the native plants anyway. Final question is, did the fencing that we put up work to protect the plants? And the answer is, well, it kept the rabbits out, and all of the plants that we planted as plugs thrived. So that's the good news. Then over winter, noticed a lot of little tunnels which indicates that voles, which are mice-like rodents, they get right through the fence because they're mouse size. And they did feed on the roots of the plants, such as the penstemons. I was rather surprised they'd go after that because that plant is a poisonous plant, but they ate the roots and killed off Penstemon digitalis. And they also damaged some of the roots of the orange butterfly weed. So that's an issue. Now it's after the garden's established, we could remove the fence because there's so many plants there that it could actually feed some rabbits. More or less, they might even keep the ground more open for the ground nesting bees in the garden there. So I'm not sure whether we should leave the fence up or not, or whether the Arboretum would be okay with that actually at this point. So, okay, if people have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm presuming my email address will be shown as somewhere where this presentation is posted. Thank you for your attention.